Hello, my name is Madison Jones, and today I will be talking about midwives in the 18th century and their responsibility to healthcare and to the court. During the 18th century, the medical practices that we have now did not exist. Common procedures that are performed every day were now either not an option or were performed mediocrely at best. Recovery and pain relief was also something that patients and doctors in the 18th century didn't have access to. Even daily procedures in recovery like labor were tough experiences to go through. The one thing the 18th century did have was a midwife. A midwife was responsible for the care of the mother before, during, and after childbirth. They also used different types of herbs and elixirs to help soothe the pain of childbirth, but overall it was a very traumatic experience. Midwives didn't have any of the equipment that we have now, so they were forced to use what they had. Laurel Thatcher Ulrich says, "The advent of natural childbirth accumulating in recent years in the revival of lay midwifery has changed historical judgments as well as obstetrics. In revisionist histories of childbirth, the pleasant story of scientific progress has been replaced by a darker tale of medical competitiveness and misplaced confidence in an imperfect science. Medical science did not on the whole, increase women's chances of surviving childbirth until well into the 20th century. The new histories argue and may actually have increased the dangers. The resources midwives had access to were slim to none, but they made the best with what they could. Midwives during the 18th century were relied on not only in healthcare, but by the legal systems as well. Midwives were held to a high standard, which wasn't normal for a woman during those times. The duties of a woman during the 18th century consisted of working on the family farm or taking care of their children. There were little to no opportunities for women to excel for themselves, which makes how midwifery was very revolutionary because how empowering it was for women. One of those women was named Martha Ballard. Martha Ballard was a historical figure that allows us to investigate and learn more about midwifery through the detailed journals she kept during her time as a midwife. Without Martha Ballard, there would be little to no documentation regarding midwives in the early American colonies. In the article titled "The Living Mother of a Living Child, Midwifery and Mortality in Post-Revolutionary New England" by Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, in the article, she discusses midwives post-Revolutionary War and how influential Martha Ballard's diary was. Martha Ballard was a very prominent midwife during this time, and without her diary, there wouldn't be much recorded information regarding midwifery in the 18th century. Midwives were supposed to keep very detailed diaries, but just of names and dates of birth, but Martha Ballard's diary was different because she was able to record the birthing process and give doctors and historians now information of how childbirth was in the 18th century. Martha Ballard performed her first delivery in 1778, though her diary does not begin until 6 years later. Between 1785 and 1812, she recorded 814 deliveries. The expansiveness of her record is unusual not only among midwives, few of whom left any written evidence of their practice. Martha Ballard used many different herbs and elixirs mixed at home to help soothe the mothers in labor. She also had the help of attendees and witnesses during childbirth. According to an article written by Annie Chandler called "From Birthing Chamber to Courtroom," the medical and legal communities of the Colonel Essex County Midwife, messages summoning the attending women and were sent as soon as the expectant mother's first labor pains began. On arriving, the attendants prepared a room for the birth by shutting up all departures such as keyholes and by darkening the rooms with curtains. so that the room had to be lit with candles. Afterwards, they prepared a warm drink known as a caudle, usually sweetened spiced wine, for the mother to drink. The wine had alcohol in it, which would help soothe the pain. While these preparations were being made, the midwife, or the most medically competent woman present, monitored the mother's progress. Then the mother and her attendants followed the instructions of the midwife until the child was born and the mother had recovered. Although few midwives kept a detailed process of their births, they did keep a record for court purposes. Midwives were responsible for testifying in court cases regarding the bastardy and different sexual crime cases. Because having sex before marriage was illegal to prevent unwanted births and overpopulation, sex scandals and cases were high in Europe and America. The presence of multiple female attendants provided medical and emotional support for mother and midwife alike during labor. They also provided a built-in witness system. Giving birth out of wedlock, sexual intercourse before marriage, and infanticide, which is infant suicide, were all punishable crimes in Europe and European colonies in the Western Hemisphere in the early modern period. Midwives were required to repeatedly ask unwed mothers who had fathered their children. Children born within the first 9 months of marriage were carefully scrutinized to determine whether they had been conceived before or after matrimony. Women who gave birth to stillborn children needed some means of proving that their children were indeed stillborn and not victims of infanticide. Evidence that midwife had followed the most proper procedure of action during such birth was the only way to provide any form of legal protection for women giving birth under such circumstances. Consequently, the early modern birth ritual meant that midwives served as both medical and legal professionals. Midwives were held to a very high standard when it came to the public eye. European midwives had been competent, well-respected members of society, and their professional lives were closely linked to their reputation. Likewise, they were more likely to be involved in checking the alleged witch for signs of the devil's mark. Where midwives appear in such accounts, it is always the role of the agent of respectability. The fact that they were able to check for a witch's mark is really significant because a lot of midwives were blamed for witchcraft due to their elixirs that they would mix for pain. So it really just depended on the town or the area where the midwife was practicing, whether they were able to be involved in a court case with witchcraft. But most midwives were involved in cases with bastardy and sexual crime cases. Midwives were extremely important, and they crafted not only the way that women were empowered back then, but also nursing and labor and delivery now. And thank you so much.